Hey guys, so as I promised yesterday afternoon, I'm going to do a live for a couple of weeks on a Friday about this time, just sort of wrapping up the week. And, wow, it's been like quite a week in the world of nutrition and health and everything that's been coming out in the media and through social media. And there's probably been a lot of confusion. I guess for me, for the last month, in all honesty, I've just been a bit of an exhausted practitioner. I have been really wanting to hide under a rock as far as I guess all the confusion that's happening in the health and wellness space. And I, thought about throwing in my entire business and doing something completely different and lots of different things. That happens to me sometimes. But what I thought, well, was, a lot of people turn to me because they just want some clarity and they want common sense. And a lot of my clients keep coming back to me, every 6 months or so, year after year, because they know that they can trust me. And, I thought I'd share some of my thoughts on some of the stuff that's happened, I guess, as far as health and nutrition is concerned, in particular in the last couple of weeks, and just try to bring some common sense back into the conversation and, I guess be a bit of a voice of reason, because that's what we try to do. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was I posted earlier in the week, and I've actually done a blog post on it as well, about one of the studies that was recently released about how heavily processed foods are bad for us. So my initial kind of, I suppose sarcastic thoughts were, oh my goodness, I wonder how much money they spent on that study. Like, seriously, I can't believe we needed a study to prove that, fake food is bad for us. But there was a couple of interesting things that came out of this. And, if you haven't read the study, I'll sum it up. But basically, there were two groups, and they gave them the same food. Oh, sorry, they gave the one group of food, they were fed really heavily processed foods, and then the other group was fed unprocessed foods, basically. So by heavily processed food, like food that's really like out of a packet, essentially, as opposed to fresh whole foods, which we always talk about being best. And what they did was they gave both groups the same meals. They had the same calories and the same macronutrient breakdown. But what they found was that so they received the same number of calories initially, but the people who were getting the really processed food, those people tended to go back for more food and they overate as a result. Whereas the people who got less, were fed, I guess, more healthy food, they were more satisfied by what they were getting and they didn't tend to overeat. And at the end of the study, obviously, they concluded, okay, ultra processed food leads to overeating, and that group in general gained weight, whereas the other group lost weight. So it's serious. It's not rocket science, and it's what I tell clients all the time. It's literally exactly what the Pringles ad says. Once you pop, you can't stop. Processed food is made in a way that it literally hijacks our appetite. So, like the first thing we try to do at the Balanced Nutritionist is get people onto like a whole foods diet and minimizing processed foods as much as possible, because it just doesn't provide any nutrients and it literally hijacks all your taste buds and just makes you want to keep eating. It's designed that way. People don't, you don't have to. Sometimes people are like, oh, I just can't stop. Is there something wrong with me? Not really. That's the way they make it. They're smart. They want you to buy it all the time. They want you to become addicted to it. It's terrible, but they spend millions of dollars on making this food addictive for profits, essentially. Now, one of the things that I thought was interesting about the study, and like what I would love to see is I would have loved to see a study where it was done in a similar way. So you had two different groups of people. One was fed, say, let's call it whole foods, and one would be fed ultra processed foods. And I'd love to see both groups receiving the same, like, meals at the same time that were made up of the same number of calories and the same macronutrients. And then I'd love to see it end there. So I would love it if those participants basically had to eat what they were given and no more, no less. So basically at the end of, say, a 2-week period or a 4-week period, you had two groups of people that literally ate the same number of calories and the same macronutrients, but one was from processed food and one was from unprocessed foods. because that would prove a major point and end this whole debate about, oh, yeah, there's still people out there that say it doesn't really matter what you eat, just as long as you eat the right number of calories every day and you don't overeat, you don't take in too much energy, and, it just matters about your macros. I honestly think maybe there's a small portion of the population that can cope with that, but most of us probably cannot. And this, like the kinds of people that we see in the clinic, it doesn't matter if they eat 400 calories a day. If they're eating the wrong food, it just doesn't work for them. They feel rubbish, they hold weight, they're inflamed. It's not good. And the reason for that is because we believe the quality of food is so much more important than the quantity. And the extra chemicals and preservatives and rubbish that they add to processed food actually interferes with the way your body operates. Like, it interferes with your hormones. It causes crazy amounts of inflammation in the body. It interferes with your brain chemistry. It does all kinds of things to you that goes far beyond making you eat more than you should. And I guess that's what we always, that's why we're so passionate about just trying to help people eat better quality food as a starting point at the Balanced Nutritionist. So I would love to see a research study that sort of looked at that instead of just proving that ultra-processed food makes you pop and never stop, because we kind of already knew that, but okay. So moving on from that, we help lots of people get onto a whole foods diet. We have a whole foods program at the moment, which is doing really well. And sometimes it can be really overwhelming because you're in that cycle of, junk food, artificial snack bars, just grabbing and going for and you feel like you're addicted. But we can help you break that cycle, and you'll feel a lot better really quickly. So if that's something you're struggling with, then reach out, because we do this kind of stuff all the time. So then the next piece of news that literally just made me want to crawl under a rock and never emerge again was the fact that apparently Weight Watchers is releasing an app for children, basically that encourages dieting. So it's all about helping them track their food intake and their weight and their activity levels. So 80% of what we do in the clinic is basically help people try to get healthy, right? And we do that through food. The other 20% is actually spent talking to adolescents, and sometimes people who are younger than adolescent, who are already developing issues around food, and they're scared about what to eat and what they can eat and what they can't eat. And is fruit bad for me? Is this bad for me? And, it's all this confusion and everything that's being thrown around, and we're trying really hard not to contribute to that, but actually just fix the issue. So I just think this whole idea of, for a start, kids getting on apps, well, aren't we supposed to be encouraging kids to get off technology and move? I mean, it's a direct contraindication of research that's coming out. But I mean, I just think we've just had this study done that proves that processed food is so bad for us, and yet there's massive companies that can still market all this crap to kids alongside some crappy little plastic toy to make them, really want it, which, by the way, I don't know about you guys, but I've noticed there's this huge the supermarkets banned plastic bags, and now all of a sudden plastic toys are everywhere instead. So I really don't think we've helped the environment at all, because our overall use of plastic seems to have either just been a negative or increased, because these plastic little ramekin or toy things are everywhere. So I just think, if we're going to do studies that prove how bad processed foods are, why don't we look at the way they're being marketed at children? Because that's if you can get kids eating fresh food, then you're probably going to solve 90% of the problem as far as childhood health is concerned. So that made me really disappointed that it feels like it's just another company trying to make money off a company that's making money off causing a problem, if that makes sense. So instead of saying, well, the problem is that kids are eating a lot of processed food and they're not moving enough, instead instead of addressing that problem, we've just left that alone because there's lots of money happening over there. And instead, well, we'll just invent an app that will put a band-aid on this problem and make more money by charging people to, or charging kids to basically use our service so that, you know, we put them on a diet, which they're going to fail at anyway, in all honesty, unless we get this, unless we encourage them to eat better quality food. So I don't know. The world's gone mad. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on that. And then, you know, in other news, the Heart Foundation has finally decided that full-fat dairy is, you know, not really that bad after all. And I mean, I don't know. Nutritionists have been, I honestly don't think in my degree we were ever taught really to use low-fat dairy because, you know, dairy is a source of lots of vitamins, and specifically fat-soluble vitamins for those of us who, you know, have no issues with dairy. And like, you take the fat out, you're going to take the vitamins out, right? And like, let's just put this into perspective. I'm really glad that this research is, you know, that they've finally decided after all, okay, it doesn't really matter. You know, full-fat milk isn't that bad after all. Let's just put this in perspective, though. We've been arguing this issue for, goodness knows, like decades. And we're talking like 2%. Like, there's full-fat milk is like 3.5 or 4 grams or something of fat per 100 mil, and low-fat milk is about 2. So it's like 2 or 3 grams worth of fat we're talking about. That ain't responsible for obesity or, you know, the type 2 diabetes epidemic. 2 grams of fat is not responsible for that. Like, it's literally looking at much bigger things than that. So, you know, that was breaking news in the nutrition world this week, and we're just not tackling the big issues, I don't think, in my opinion. So that was sort of 3 big things that happened in the media over the last couple of weeks, and I guess from my perspective, it's really hard when you know, we try to maintain a really positive space on our platforms. We try to help our clients long term to make positive choices that work for their body, that encourages health to be the status quo. But you know, sometimes it's hard because there's so much noise in this industry, and I know that makes people really confused, and I don't want to confuse people because confusion just leads to stress, and that's just as bad as eating poor food, to be honest. Like, all the stress that the conversation and confusion around food is causing is just as bad as eating badly, that in all honesty. So we try to, I guess, break it down, you know, really hit the basics with our clients, and just, you know, what we really want people to do is feel confident with themselves and their decisions, and what they want to eat might be slightly different to the next. There's no one size fits all diet for everybody. And that moves me on to my next point. So there's been a big push and a lot of research in the last few weeks coming out around personalized nutrition. So we're finding out information about, you know, the fact that different people respond very differently to foods. And you know, again, this is something that could potentially cause some confusion, but personalized nutrition is something we are really passionate about, the Balanced Nutritionist. I don't want to go into that on this video because it'll just add another level of conversation. I am going to do a Facebook Live early next week on personalized nutrition and what it's all about. But I guess what I want to say is, you know, the best thing that you have is your own internal radar and your own mindfulness. So, you know, if you're eating, you know, fairly well, you're eating mainly whole foods, you know, all you really have to do is ask yourself, how do I feel when I eat this food? You know, do I feel good? Do I feel bad? Does it make me run to the toilet? Does it make me feel exhausted? Do I come up in a rash? You know, because we're all going to be a little bit individual to the way that we respond to food. And sometimes, you know, some things that we accept as healthy aren't necessarily great for all of us. And at the end of the day, you have to trust yourself more so than anyone else to help you work that out. Because it doesn't matter what you read. You can read, one week you're going to read that apples are good for you. The next week you're going to read they're bad for you. One week you're going to read that eggs cause cholesterol. The next week you're going to read that they don't. But, you know, you've got to really just cut out the noise, eat whole, you know, eat food as close to nature as possible, and make sure, just ask yourself the question when you're sitting down to a meal, or when you're selecting food when you go shopping, or if you're out ordering something at a restaurant, just say, you know what, if I eat this, am I going to feel better in half an hour after I finish? And if the answer is yes, then great, like, enjoy it. Because we don't want people to be stressed about food. We want them to be healthy and well, but we don't want to take it to a level where, you know, people are having anxiety attacks over, you know, whether or not they can eat a piece of fruit. So, you know, that's basically a wrap up of what's been happening in the media and you know, social media around nutrition. Just wanted to kind of bring it back to common sense and bring back and sort of hone in on some of those basics. If you thought this was worthwhile listening to, guys, tag anyone in it that you think might benefit from it, or anyone else who's been talking about these, you know, that some of these things have been popping up in the news lately. And we might keep this going as a weekly Friday thing for the next few weeks and see how people respond. Remember to reach out if you're having any problems. We deal with, you know, we work with people who are, you know, who need help with their nutrition, but we also work with people who really need to just talk to somebody about how they're feeling about food, and maybe, you know, whether they've got some stresses and anxiety around food as well. So we're definitely not counselors and psychologists, but we can look at that from a food perspective as well and offer some advice around that area too. So just reach out if you're struggling. Thanks again for tuning in, and enjoy your weekend.